So we're back again in this gorgeous corner of the world. Where's my Tung Tung Sahur card? Oh, got my little mic, got my situation going on. I thought I'd just chat through each track and some of the ideas that are kind of going on for the EP. I know I did chat about this a bit on the radio, so go and have a listen to that if you haven't. Cool, Shorter Days, yeah. So I thought I could just chat over some of the tracks and just go through a bit of my kind of thoughts behind it and anything interesting. So we'll start with Begin, which is the intro. It's definitely like there as one to introduce the theme. I think like I wanted something that was separate from the main bulk of the tracks that still like I wanted an intro in there, I guess. I wanted something that felt very thematic and kind of introduced the project, but I didn't want it looped in with another track because like it's going to take away from that track, I guess. But yeah, I feel like to make this I took elements from the title track from Shorter Days and just messed with them. So like you can hear the kind of melody is the main melody from Shorter Days. But I just love the idea of like bringing something that feels a bit more human and a bit more handmade. And I guess that's where this kind of like plucky sound comes in. Definitely trying to go for like a guitar thing without being able to play the guitar. But I like that it doesn't necessarily sit in, you know, you can tell it's electronic, right? You can tell it's not like an actual guitar. And I don't mind it kind of sitting in that place. So yeah, definitely there to just kind of act as a bed, act as like an intro act to kind of set the scene, in order to give people a feeling of the atmosphere and like act almost as a bed for me to play these little like kind of ambient, weird like walking sounds and little snippets of like different environments in which I've made the music, which is our kind of running theme throughout the project. Nice one. All right, next one, Shorter Days. I feel like for Shorter Days, like it reminds me of this kind of constant thing I'm going for when I'm making tunes, which is like the right balance between organic elements and electronic elements. Although everything in the song is like synthesized, except for like the vocal samples, I'm always trying to go for that sound that still feels like it has a human element. The drums definitely help with that, like using more live drum sounds, swinging them more, delaying stuff, playing with like different kind of more live elements. I think it's like, it's always hard to emulate live instruments through MIDI, and I can't really play any live instruments very well. So it's something that I'm always trying to do is like emulate stuff through MIDI and trying to mess with sounds so that they do still feel a bit live and a bit kind of like human, because I guess like my favorite electronic music is electronic music that still feels human, you know, still feels like it was made not by a robot, still feels like it was made like with some errors, with like some kind of grit and something a bit off with it. So that's what I'm trying to go for here, I guess. And I think like this is probably one of my favorite tunes where I've managed to strike the balance well. I think there are some tunes where I'm like, that just sounds like a bad attempt at making something sound live versus this one where it kind of like embraces the electronic elements, but also embraces like stuff trying to feel a bit more live and stuff. So I think that does well. And yeah, I just think, don't know, just really like the groove on this one. I think it's like quite upbeat and quite happy, but also does feel nostalgic. It does feel a little bit kind of like it has a bit of emotion, you know? It's not too, like the chord progression isn't like super predictable. It's not like really happy or really sad. It's kind of, well, hopefully this is what I think, I guess. But you know, I don't really know that much about music theory, but I guess I just try to make stuff that has quite a lot of tension. So a lot of notes close together, kind of lots of extra notes in the chords and stuff like that. Yeah, and I think this lead synth that's just kind of like wah 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 is like, it's kind of like the main feature in the tune, I guess. And I think it's something that like took me a while to kind of dial in, because I think I just went through so many versions where like it either just sounded too easy to listen to, I guess, in a way, but also too kind of or too like weird and too kind of like too syncopated, I guess. Like you don't want it to sound like being smacked about by something. Well, sometimes you do want something like that, but I didn't want it to sound like you're getting smacked about by something and there's no rhythm to it. But I also didn't want it to sound too predictable, I guess. So I think there's a good kind of few versions before we got into this place where I think it works well as the main kind of like motif in the song. Cool. Next is Scent.
And I don't.
Like, I guess the unique part about this one is like the main element that kind of jumps out is the spoken word, I guess, and is the kind of like those sampled vocals that I always go on about like, you know, just taking random conversations and chucking them in there or whatever. And like they're front and center, and also like you can't really understand what they're saying. Like it is in English, but like, not that if it wasn't you wouldn't be able to understand it, but you know, it's just all chopped about and kind of like very front and center as the kind of like in the place where like someone speaking or singing would be in like a normal tune, I guess, in like a more commercial tune, right? I unfortunately cannot sing, so this kind of serves for me as a way to make tunes that like still scratch that part of your brain where something is still front and center and it doesn't feel like something's missing without me having to sing or speak on the track. So that's pretty handy. But yeah, I guess like I do that in a lot of my tunes, whereas this one is like very obvious. It's very, very kind of like in your face with it. But yeah, I think the bit that stands out for me is the kind of like plucky sound. It almost sounds like a sitar or something, and it very well could be something like that. Obviously, like a kind of MIDI version of that, but it actually does sound quite live, which is really nice. And again, it comes back to the same idea of like live elements and electronic elements, and trying to make them come together, but also sit in a place where it doesn't feel like a mess. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the main idea with this one. This probably airs a bit more on the messy side than like Shorter Days or some of the other tunes in terms of like how the elements play together, but I do still think it works, which is good. Ascent has like a kind of groove, and then in the second part, it's very similar to the start. It just like really only has like one or two extra elements that kind of come in, which is kind of just like this kind of like beat in the background. Almost just sounds like someone's just like spamming away, pressing one button, which I guess is what I was. Yeah, and just kind of like, it doesn't feel like you're adding like an extra melody or anything like else, but it's just enough to make it feel new and make it feel a bit fresh and not make it feel boring, while still maintaining, you know, it's a house tune, like it is about the drums and it's about kind of like keeping a groove going throughout the whole track. So I think that's quite a nice touch sometimes for me, is like not trying to write a whole B section, you know, not trying to write like a whole new track to have as this kind of like second like drop. Instead have like more of a guiding kind of groove that goes throughout the whole thing, and then taking enough stuff out and bringing enough stuff in at times where you still keep the rhythm of the whole tune, so like you can still dance to it, but also you're keeping it fresh and you still feel like there's progression through the track, I guess, as well. Nice. All right, Promise.
It's kind of opening up.
Promise just feels like it really comes from like a certain era of me making tunes, like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it's like all I wanted to do was make kind of jazz samples, like I really, or like disco and kind of soul. I really was just loving, and I still do, to be fair, like it's still something I really enjoy, but like all I was focusing on was like, how can I make this sound live? And I must have done like 10 or so different attempts at just trying to make a sample that sounds like one of these old 70s records, and this is the one that was the best. And actually I do think it works well in that way. Like it does sound like a groove from 1979 or whatever, do you know what I mean? Like it does feel like a soul sample, which is really nice to know that I've kind of written that myself and made it all through electronic sounds. Like at no point in this tune have I ever plugged an instrument into the computer, which is, I guess, like a good thing and a bad thing. I think in my eyes it's something I'm quite proud of, because like all I've wanted to do is make stuff sound live that's MIDI and kind of like cheat the system in that way, I guess, because it's a shortcut instead of like learning to actually play an instrument. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. And then yeah, I think like from there I didn't really need to do too much. Like the sample works for itself, bring in a few vocal chops, that kind of thing. Keep the chops like quite simple, doesn't need to be like all over the place. I've listened back to a lot of like Cassius or like early Daft Punk tunes, or a lot of the kind of like French touch scene that I take a lot of inspo from. The chops aren't like really advanced, you know what I mean? They're not the same as you'd hear on like a Madlib beat or like a Jake One tune or something like that. Like they're very like they're very simple, you know? Usually it'll just be like 2 or 3 chops and you just set it to a loop and just like kind of like through the repetition it kind of becomes this groove, which is definitely something I wanted to do here. And I think, yeah, like once you have the sample, or once you've made the sample in this case, like you can let that kind of shine and let that be the basis for the track. You don't need to add too many extra steps. I think for me, it was just probably like simple chops, add a bass line, add some vocals in there as well, and figure out a kind of like breakdown B section kind of thing, and then just like have it, you know, like sequence the track that way and just find the sections and keep it simple. Cool, 24 hours time.
I want to get better.
So yeah, 24 Hours started back in Dundee when I was just trying to learn the piano, and I was like trying all these chords, and I would write chord progressions like in FL Studio and then try and learn them. And like it did help, but I don't know how much it's actually like stuck with me. But that is how this kind of tune started, is like I really wanted to write quite a jazzy chord progression and then learn how to play it. I don't know if I learned it properly. I think there's a video out there like on my Instagram somewhere of like me playing the chords, but I don't know how well I was actually playing them. That's kind of how this one came about. But I remember there was a version where I was like so happy with it and I was finished with it. And I listened to it like 6 months later and I was like, this is just missing like so much stuff. Like it's just too chill, you know? Like it's just very, very, I mean, it was nice, don't get me wrong, but it was like basically just that Rhodes keyboard, the bass line, and some drum elements. And I think at the time when I made it, I did really want to make something very, very chill and quite a bit quieter and quite a bit more relaxing. Like I think I did want to make something a bit like kind of Harrison BDP or Chaos in the CBD. All these guys have so many letters in their names. Including me apparently, or like Leopold, or yeah, something super kind of low-key and super chill. But I was listening to it and I was like, you know, all my favorite tunes that are still really chill, they're not boring. Like they're super, they still like kind of take you on a bit of a journey, have a lot of things going on, even if they're not like in your face. So I think it was just missing some stuff that way. And I think that's when I started to bring in like the kind of synth and make the bass line a bit more of a main feature, make the drums a bit more lively, and just have something that had a bit more energy to it and a bit more swing. Obviously, it's still a super chill track, and I think like that was a bit of a lesson for me in that like it could have loads of fucking elements and be very chill depending on how they're mixed or how they come in and out, or it could have like little to no elements and still be like very upbeat and like a bit more of like a peak time tune, you know what I mean? And something that's like has loads of energy. So that was definitely interesting on this one. Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it's just a nice kind of jazzy house one, you know? And I think it fits in well towards the end of the EP where we're kind of like, it's a bit more introspective, it's a bit more reflective, it's a bit more like kind of low down. And then moving on to Bear. So Bear was obviously the single for the EP, and it was between this and I think probably Scent was my other option in terms of like kind of releasing a tune in advance. I think this was the right choice. Like they are very close, but I think Better probably has more of an overall idea of the themes of the EP rather than Scent. Like it has all my kind of favorite things about the EP, like the kind of the vocals, like there's kind of spoken word vocals, but also like more melodic kind of sung vocals that are sampled as well. You know, it has that drum groove that is a bit weird and has like some extra elements in there, and it has the usual kind of like chord progressions and the bass lines and stuff that feels like it fits the whole kind of Shorter Days project. But yeah, I think probably something that kind of stands out when I was making it, I guess, is the bass. And I've gone on about this in other content or but yeah, I think it was just one of them where it just worked, and it just kind of worked well. I think it works both as a single and then also at this point in the EP where we're kind of getting towards the end and getting a bit more reflective, which is nice. Then the last track, Bless Me. I feel like Bless Me has a few things going on that I quite like. I think the main one that I'm happy with on this tune is this idea that for like the first kind of main section, there's no chords, like there's no melodic element. It's just like a bass line and drums and like maybe like a little bit of kind of vocal samples here and there, which is something I really struggle with. Like I really struggle to write tunes without just writing a chord progression first and kind of going from there. Whereas I feel like in this tune, I kind of forced myself to try that, and it did actually work out quite well. I mean, there was obviously loads of times where it didn't, and this is just one of the ones that did. But yeah, I think the name of the song is a bit weird. I don't know why it's called Bless Me. Like I usually just name my tunes over whatever is in my head at the time, and usually that means if I've got like the TV on in the background while I'm writing something, or I'm in a cafe and I overhear something, like I'll just put that as the name. So yeah, it maybe comes across a bit cringy. I didn't come up with it myself. Like, well, I guess I did, but not like I'm not like I need blessed. But yeah, the first part, yeah, really happy to just have like a groove with like drums that are kind of like entertaining enough, but not too overwhelming. But yeah, loads of stuff going on, which is quite fun for me. Like you know, there's like a cowbell and like a kind of like bongo-y sound, and yeah, it's all happening, man, which I think is just like, yeah, a bit of fun. And then the second half of the tune changes quite a lot. Like I think it kind of turns into something that's a bit more like euphoric and a bit more kind of overwhelming, I guess. Like it's one of the times in the EP, because something I'm really bad at is having too many things going on. Whereas this is one part in the project where I was like, I want too many things going on in a way. Like I want the person to kind of feel almost a bit overwhelmed with the sound a little bit. So yeah, so there's obviously like this kind of this synth that feels quite like, I would say, kind of euphoric and quite kind of distant and echoey, and slowly kind of comes into like front and center, and then all the other elements kick back in. It feels almost like a bit of a kind of final ending to the project, which I think works really well. Feels like a tune where, you know, it's like 5 minutes and it's like it goes all the way from like kind of a proper groove, like a proper like a dance floor tune, I would even say, all the way to something that's like much more reflective and much more introspective, which I think was my main idea with this one. And then of course ending with some random audio clip, a little video clip from my camera roll that I will have recorded at some point over the last couple of years. I think this one was from like the North Coast 500 or something. But yeah, out in the wilderness somewhere, cutting stuff together, and just like including that in. And I think that kind of instantly puts the listener in that kind of like autumnal natural setting, which is the whole theme of the project. So yeah, that's it, man. I think that's all the tracks. Been chatting for ages, so yeah, my bad. But yeah, like the project's out now. Would love if you had to listen to it. But yeah, I think I'm just really happy to have it out there and just making something for the sake of making something, you know, and like not just sitting on music for ages, and actually just doing a self-release. Yeah, I think that's pretty much me. I think I'm quite enjoying this, kind of just sitting and chatting. So probably will be a bit more of this. All right, bye.